Hi, this is a Catalyst Game Labs brand Battletech Inner Sphere Command Lance box set, one of, if not the best lance packs currently available for consumers who want to play the Inner Sphere factions for Battletech, and half the topic of this video. Fun fact, I've never seen anyone else talk about this, but the facility that makes these overseas actually has a YouTube channel where you can see this very box in the assembly line and other videos, with the injection molding process and push fitting the figures by hand and all the steps it takes to— oh my God, give me that. This is the Inner Sphere Battle Lance box set, in my mind the other contender for best lance pack given its equally classic lineup of mechs. Between these two boxes you've got the only heavies you'll ever need: Archer, Rifleman, Marauder. Right here there's supposed to be a Warhammer, but it's already been taken out and painted because I can't control myself. Oh look, the voice is— But the subject of today will be one mech from each of these boxes. Two of the lightest models available, coming in at a relatively mere 40 tons. That's actually combined. They're both 20 tons each. We have the Stinger and the Wasp, respectively. I don't think the light mechs really get the respect they deserve in the setting and by the community. In Battletech, light mechs are the most produced, available, and accessible of all battle mech weight classes in universe, used with absolutely no hesitation by most powers and high force quantities to oversaturate the enemy with sheer tonnage, or at the very least make them run out of autocannon. As a result, they tend to get a reputation of cheap, individually inefficient mechs with little to no staying power on the field, and rarely the armaments to make their often very short lifespan meaningful aside from drawing fire from a mech that would be otherwise lethal to better targets. However, as a counter-argument,
all weapons are go!
They're very cool.
Michael! Don't leave me here! Michael! Michael!
Who wouldn't want to pilot one of these? Think of all the classic scout mechs that define Battletech: the Locust, Commando, Panther, Atlas, Urdi. The list doesn't end. But if it did, the end-all beat-all for me would be the Bee and the Flea. Why? I could say it's because of their crazy mobility or cost effectiveness, but in reality no other reason than that they just got that light mech drip. There's something very nice about painting scout mechs as opposed to, say, a heavy or assault class that'll be the centerpiece of your army. Rather, they're like popcorn. You can finish painting one in one sitting and stand up and look down and be like, oh yeah, I finished that. I highly recommend you sit down, maybe not with one of these two models, but any old scout mech that you have, and give it a go, because doing these one after the other has been a really good way for me to start knocking models off my pile of shame. It's big, it's very big. As always, the first thing we're going to do is go around and identifying, as I have been doing, all the little mold lines typical of these injection molded that is typical of these injection molded models, and do our best to remove them with maybe some scraping with a hobby knife or sanding with the sanding sticks. I say my best because once again in this video my ass did not get all of them, and you can really tell later. Overall, I really do like these Catalyst Game Lab brand molds very much. I'm already a sucker for the tiny mechs because they're just so adorable and simplistic while having sufficient detail to make for a good painting experience, and man do I already have a ton of adoration for these molds with very few manufacturing errors, save for one. For some inexplicable reason, the gun on my yellow jacket isn't pointed forward, which is just dumb. Like, if you're gonna give him a gun, make him point at something. I want to see my mech and imagine I'm shooting the enemy, not at the game mat or the floor or some random infantry guy. But this error on the manufacturer's part is a great chance to learn a technique that back in the day with pewter models you basically needed to do if you wanted your miniature to survive someone so much as looking at them wrong. We start by cutting the arms away from the torso, which, by the way, these being injection molded PVC as opposed to resin or whatever most sprue models use, is very flexible, dense, and as a result difficult to cut through without a lot of force even with a sharp knife, so you want to be very careful.
Why are you the way that you are?
Then clip off a straight piece of a paper clip. These can be fairly dense, being made of either iron or more often galvanized steel wire, so you will need something closer to wire cutters than hobby snips. Now, I take my hobby pin vise and use the smallest bit, which is slightly smaller than the paper clip's thickness, and begin drilling the shit out of this guy. Okay, wait, that sounded That sounded wrong. Can we do that one again? The smaller bit is used to the end that once we've got our hole, we're going to use tweezers or pliers and a lot of effort to get the clipping into the hole. But that's good because it'll be a very tight fit and make the plastic expand around our paperclip pin piece, ultimately requiring little to no adhesive at all. Regardless of that, after that test fit, I glue it into place anyway to ensure it's going nowhere on the torso and begin drilling the corresponding side on the arm now. Then what basically amounts to nailing the two together, we now have the gun facing downrange as opposed to down under. At this point, you're probably like, okay, now time to paint it, right? No, it isn't. The other problem with the Super Hornet is that unlike the Pokey, where the modelers were at least kind enough to grace us plebeians with an actual antenna, the signature bug-looking communicator array on the Murder Hornet is absent. I'm gonna have to fix that. Okay, now you can try what I would always recommend doing and Googling how to do something you don't know how to do yourself. However, no dice. All I found is this picture of a guy who did it with no information on how you work. So here's what we're gonna do. We're not going to try to mount them on the antenna bases, which are modeled but are tooth into accurately drilled, even with pre-marking them with a dental probe. Trust me, big waste of time. So since that's not going to happen, my best guess is that the way he did it was just drilling into the back of the head with the smallest diameter drill bit possible on my pin vise. I'm going to drill 2 little holes on either side right behind each of those antenna bases. I am now going to put a little bit of super glue into the holes and clip off the bristles of a toothbrush. Yes, if you ever see hobby models with those really nice thin antennas, that's how most professional modelers do it. You grab a toothbrush or a paintbrush or a wire brush, and those little bristles are the antenna, and just hold them in place until try again. It's not hard, I promise. See, I got After a lot of tedious work, I basically got them to hold enough that I could put the model down and just let the super glue set, which, fun fact, can take up to half an hour if there's not contact pressure, which it's typically formulated to bond under. Now we're okay to start doing things. I'm only writing this now, and I don't know how many minutes into this video we are, but it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. Did I really have to do either of those things? Yeah, I did. Thankfully, the paint scheme is actually really basic. We have to start with basing the miniature, whether it's gluing on the aquarium gravel or using some sort of texture putty. This makes sure that the other layers I spray coat onto the model after the fact will, of course, overspray onto the base and add layers of protection for when we're ready to paint it. I recommend doing basing material first almost every time for wargaming models that you're going to be touching. For this reason, the color of the paste doesn't matter, but for anyone wondering, I am using Citadel line Martian Ironcrust and Martian Ironearth from their technical series. After it dried with the proper crackle effect, I generously brushed on some Vallejo matte varnish simply because it helps the flaky little crackle bits not blow off when being sprayed from an aerosol or airbrush. Now the base coat, finally the base coat. We are 8 minutes into this video and we are just basing the model. I love this hobby so much, you guys. The base coat for the mech is going to be one of the most common army colors to come across. Army Painter's Banshee Brown, which is a 1-to-1 match with Citadel's Xandri Dust. Yes, I got this because if you've seen my earlier videos, you might be aware of the fact that my Citadel paint turned into Play-Doh. This is a very popular color for terrain and armies alike. Most Mordian, Steel Legion, and Shovel Knights, I actually can't remember their name right now, have used this on their infantry or armor in Warhammer, and I'm also fairly certain that's what they use to rim the bases for the models on the boxes. Using my airbrush, as I'm spraying this on for the first layer, I really want to make sure that I get nice, even coverage, getting into all the little crevices, which only get more prolific with pre-assembled miniatures that make sub-assemblies largely impossible, or at the very least not worth the effort, especially really small ones like this. Like, I had Armymen as a kid that probably stood taller than these. So now that we've established a quite nice even base coat for each miniature, we're going to come in with Vallejo Model Masters Cold White and utilize the tried and true zenithal highlight because it's a safe bet that that's going to give the model a lot of depth, and the only uncertainty being whether you're ever going to see a tutorial where I don't do this. Seriously, do this. I quite like the appearance we have, and the models are just starting to come to life, but the paint really does blend with all the details, so what we need to do is really try and bring those out. Rather than going straight to a wash like you would perhaps into it if you are a miniature painter, we are going to instead wait a moment and use a cool little trick I picked up by going on the YouTube miniature painting video brain rot shit just like you're on right now. See, now the screen's black so you can look at yourself in the reflection of your little monitor and feel sad about the life decisions that have led you up to this point. And instead, coat them with a gloss varnish. Any gloss will do. You do not need super gloss or anything like that. I am using Citadel's, what do they even call it? Not gloss, because that would be easy. It's storm shield? No, it's Ardcoat. Stupid British people and their stupid paint names. Gloss paint typically achieves its appearance by being very smooth and almost polished, so it appears more reflective, shiny, or more accurately, probably wet. Now, this is going to do two things. One, gloss coats are rather famously the most durable variants of clear coat you can get, so it's protecting our work thus far and ultimately making it harder to chip the paint job. And because it is very smooth, when we apply a generous helping of Army Painter's dark tone wash rather than having a pulling effect towards the flatter surfaces like most washes would, it is much more prone to flow almost entirely into the crevices and little details because of the smoothness of the surfaces, retaining little surface tension. Obviously, the finished step is going to look very glossy, and we are going to wait a hot minute for this to dry because visually it's very difficult to tell, and it's generally considered poor practice to just poke your miniatures with your finger. We will immediately follow up with a liberal spraying of Vallejo's Model Master Matte Acrylic Clear Coat until the gloss is no longer so prevalent and you can actually make the detail out much better. Without so much light being thrown back into your eyes, now we can see enough to proceed to do the real brushwork. And of course, by real brushwork, I mean a dry brush. We're going to come back with Banshee Brown and use a really well-defined wide brush. You see how the bristles form a chisel tip about a 1/4 inch wide, but are very uniform. This allows us to get a really controllable, very tight, and very fine edge highlight by gently and intentionally repetitively feathering the edges of our model with just the smallest amount of paint, most of which has already been rubbed off on the paper towel beforehand. Like I said, real brushwork. It's worth a mention that at this point, these two little fellas look very good for what we've done, that being very little in terms of technically difficult steps. If you are following along, number one, why? This is like a rhetorical tutorial, I didn't expect you to. And two, if you see anything that looks too complicated, or maybe you're aware enough of your skill set that maybe you don't want to try that just yet, feel free to skip it or even just base your model however you like it and call it a day, because really it's up to you for what passes for sufficient when painting models for your tabletop games. But I'm going to move on with the first instance of actual detailing, and maybe you can follow along with me. Using Vallejo's Silver RLM01 from the Model Air Metallic line, I will use an intermediate detail brush I've reserved for metallics to hit anywhere on these mechs I think need to be silver, filling in little panels and details in their entirety, like the Stingray's rotary pivot that actuates the neck, the gun barrel for his medium laser, the sternum panel support here, his cute little antenna, and very carefully the armored lining around his canopy glass. For the Biddy Buggy, we'll just do the entirety of his face panel and paint over the silver later with the actual glass color, and again with the medium laser barrel getting a coat of silver paint. If you, like me, find that you have some stray paint on a panel where it doesn't belong, don't panic, but act immediately. Rinse your brush thoroughly so as much of the metallic flakes leave it as possible so you don't get more on, and while it's damp, just gently massage and scratch off your mistake. Mine still looked shiny after this, but that's actually not the metallic. That's because I've also ended up removing the last matte clear coat and exposed the gloss underneath. This is why you should be adding clear coats after every so many steps. Finishing up with a couple panels in the back, and we're ready for the next step. Next step, orange. Citadel Nuln oil is, as always, my choice for metal washes. Why? Because I have it, and we're just going to load our brush and liberally add it to the metallic surfaces we've just drawn out and leave it to dry. There's nothing technical about this process, and once again, with really easy methods, we've got a really nice product for absolutely no effort. Anyways, check this shit out. I'm gonna do some freehanding. We're gonna come in with some more Army Painter colors, this one being Dry Rust. It's actually a nice, vibrant, deep orange. I'm gradually getting more and more of these Army Painter bottles because despite a really less than admirable experience with my first one, the new formulated solutions with mixing balls in the bottle, yeah, they put bearings in the bottle so you can mix them like a can of paint would. With this brush, you might see it's not the greatest. Very used, got some bristles missing and clipped out. Doesn't really come to a great point, but I'm using this to make a point. That being that you really don't need a very small, fine, or even a really nice brush to get good freehanding results. Just know your brush and have lots of practice so you can do stuff like striping this guy's little arm here. What most people don't understand when they begin painting and really trying some of those tough techniques like edge highlights and freehand stripes or checkers you could find in a Citadel tutorial is that a lot more goes into it than just being able to paint paint good. Knowing how to hold a brush, yes, but how to also hold the model, and maybe what angle is working best, and what level of pressure to apply to the model, and most importantly, above any of those other things, how you have thinned your paints in the first place. You'd be surprised to know that the outcome of any freehand attempt by most competent people is often already decided by how well their paints are mixed before their brush even makes contact with the miniature. I like to use 1 drop of Vallejo Glaze medium in most servings of my paints, as it has a good consistency to thin down the otherwise thick paint and also serves to significantly slow the drying process. It allows me to rectify mistakes easier. Anyways, there's not so much I actually wanted to do on this little stinger, just a stripe on the arm, a stripe down the torso, checkering some panels on the front and back legs, and covering the whole head shroud to make the focal point of the model to have an extra bit of pop. Moving on to the Wiggler, we will seek to do more or less the same things in the same places. A nice large stripe filling in down this angled plate on one side of the chest, a little touches here and there, and I forgo trying to do that the same thing with his head because there's a lot of tiny details, not really large surfaces and chunks to fill it in, so it would have been much harder and yielded little to no good results. Just going to show that another key aspect that makes a good painter is knowing when to quit while you're ahead. Pro tip, if you have to ask yourself, it looks good already, should I even do this? You probably shouldn't. These are certainly beginning to look nice, but now let's move on to my favorite part and certainly what really ties any model together, jeweling the cockpit canopies of our mechs. 3 Army Painter blues here in order. We have Dark Sky, Deep Blue, and Electric Blue. You can hear that little bearing rattling around in there. Starting with Dark Blue, I'm going to show you how to mix some paint if you don't have any medium like I normally use. My brush here is loaded with water, and we're going to let it siphon down onto our little palette cup here. We are going to proceed to slowly but surely mix the 2 pools together until I feel that I have reached the correct consistency, which isn't sluggishly glue-like, but also isn't runny like water. It'll look something like this. Now, taking my model, I'm gonna, wow, you really can't see that, like, at all. Whoa, well, shit. Moving on to our other model, there we go. We're gonna very lightly, with only the slightest of pressure, apply it. You might say, that's not well mixed because I can see through it. Yeah, use multiple thin coats. Moving on. One of the panels of the wasp's head really didn't print with the same definition of the other 2, so I had to really make sure that the paint didn't make its way out of that section. This is why you can't mix your paints to be too runny, because then it's more like a wash, and that's exactly what happens. Having coated each model, now we're going to use Deep Blue. This time I am mixing it with Glaze Medium and proceed to, wow, you really cannot see that at all. Okay, we're making sure to only touch up the middle part of each canopy panel now. I use the Glaze Medium so my paint isn't as runny and stays put instead of more loose like the last coat. You may also notice I have now moved onto a much finer pointed brush that I only really use for eyes and a little jeweling details such as this, because it's really important that I get this bit right. Electric Blue came out to be significantly brighter, so we started by mixing half and half with our Deep Blue solution, now being bright enough to see exactly what's going on here. And now with just some of that brightest color, we're gonna just dot the interior of the wombat's canopy, and you can really see the glow effect it has taken on. And for the Stanley, we're just gonna line the very bottom and put a little dot in the top corner so it looks like a proper reflection of some light source. Just a little touching up to go. I like to weather my models after the detailing process by using a nice little clipped piece of sponge between some tweezers with some unthinned base color paint and dab it around to give an impression that the subject has been chipped through some previous battle damage and no longer has a pristine paint job. And then a little bit of my Banshee brown and silver paints to paint anywhere I messed up and got some blue where it shouldn't be. One more clear coat off camera, and now all we have to do is look at it. You really can see how fantastic these results are, and I hope that if you have followed along that you have found as well how not particularly technical any of the methods shown in this video are. My favorite is obviously Bumblebee. He's the best Autobot just because I think he's a little cooler and he comes with his antenna, but I will fully acknowledge how perfectly Starscream's glass ended up and how equally, if not more striking, his orange chest stripe is. And if you think these shots are taken immediately after, no, this is shot over a month later. After some case carrying, display, and a little bit of play, they have maintained all their color and detail and retained the same look as the day I painted them, and I would call that a raging success. If you like the video, like the video. Go ahead and comment what I did wrong with painting or got wrong about the mechs, or else telling me how your dream mech is definitely a locust. Until then, I am going to go flex on the infantrymen with my mechs, because at the end of the day, even if it's only 20 tons, it's still degrees of magnitude better than being this guy.